Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari.
Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari.
Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari.
Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari.
Yashodanandana Braja Janarandana. Yashodanandana Braja Janarandana. Yamuna Tira Vanachare. Yamuna Tira Vanachare. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihare. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari. Yashodanandana Braja Janarandana. Yashodanandana Braja Janarandana. Yamuna Tira Vanachare. Yamuna Tira Vanachare. Shri Shri Radha Govinda Deva ki, Grantara Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam ki, Nitai Go Brahmanande. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Deafening voice. Take your phone. Okay, we are reading today from the second canto of the Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, chapter 8, entitled Questions by King Parikshit. And we are taking a look today at text number 23. Yatatma Tantro Bhagavan Vikritat Yatma Mayaya Visrijavayata Mayam Udaste Sakshivat Vibhu Yathatma Tantro Bhagavan Vikritat Yatma Mayaya Visrijavayata Mayam Udaste Sakshivat Vibhu Yatatma Tantro Bhagavan Vikridat Yatma Mayaya Visrijavayata Mayam Udaste Sakshivat Vibhu. Please repeat. Yatatma Tantro Bhagavan Vikridat Yatma Mayaya Visrijavayata Mayam Udaste Sakshivat Vibhu. Yatatma Tantro Bhagavan Vikridatyatma maya. Visrijavayata maya. Udhaste sakshivat vibhu.
Yatatma tantro bhagavan.
Yatatma tantro bhagavan.
Vikridatyatma mayayam.
Vikridatyatma maya.
Vishiyavayata mayam.
Visrijavayata mayam.
Udaste sakshivad vibhu.
Udaste sakshivat vibhu.
Yatatma tantro bhagavan.
Yatatma tantro bhagavan.
Vikridatyatma mayayam.
Vikridatyatma maya. Visrijavayata mayam. Udaste sakshivat vibhu. Yatatma tantro bhagavan. Vikridatyatma mayaya. Visrijavayata mayam. Udaste sakshivat vibhu. Yata. As. Atmatantraha. Independent. Bhagavan. The personality of Godhead. Vikridati. Enjoys his pastimes. Atma mayaya. By his internal potency. Visrijya. Giving up. Va. As also. Yata. As he desires. Mayam. The external potency. Udhaste. Remains. Sakshiva. Just as the witness. Vibhu. The Almighty. Translation. The independent personality of Godhead enjoys his pastimes by his internal potency, and at the time of annihilation gives them up to the external potency, and he remains a witness to it all. Purport. Lord Shri Krishna, being the Supreme Personality of Godhead and fountainhead of all other incarnations, is the only independent person. He enjoys his pastimes by creation as he desires, and gives them up to the external energy at the time of annihilation. By his internal potency only, he kills the demon Putana, even though enjoying his pastimes in the lap of his mother, Yashoda. And when he desires to leave this world, he creates the pastimes of killing his own family members, Yadukula, and remains unaffected by such annihilation. He is the witness of everything that is happening, and yet he has nothing to do with anything. He is independent in every respect. Maharaj Parikshit desired to know more perfectly, for a pure devotee ought to know well. Om Jnanatimirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurumilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Gadamayam Tatati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yutapadakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavangscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Zahagana Raghunatam Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padam Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakanvitangscha Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurange Radhe Vrindavanishvare Vrishabhanu Sudadevi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shrivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Yatatma Tantro Bhagavan Vikridatyatma Mayaya Visrijavayata Mayam Mudaste Sakshivat Vibhu The independent personality of Godhead enjoys his pastimes by his internal potency, and at the time of annihilation gives them up to the external potency, and he remains a witness to it all. So Krishna is explained here to be Atma Tantra, and also Atma Mayaya. He is Atma Tantra. He is independent. Krishna is unique in that he has one of his Shaktis, one Shakti that is only completely under his control. He empowers other living beings with many other Shaktis. He is the fountainhead of all incarnations and the fountainhead of all energies, but he distributes these energies and he empowers other individuals with various forms of different kinds of his energies, like strength and power and intelligence. But one Shakti that is uniquely Krishna's is the Icha Shakti, or the desiring potency. So Krishna is unique in that whatever happens to him and with him and around him is totally his own desire. We are not like that. That is the difference between when the Lord enters into this world and he performs his pastimes. It looks similar. It looks like he takes birth and he grows old, and he grows up and he does many things, and at a certain point he disappears. But there's a major difference between Krishna's pastimes and our own experience in life. And that difference is that Krishna's pastimes is a complete expression of his personal desire. Whereas in our life it's a little different. Basically in our life, we try our best here and there to see what we can do, but it's not exactly how we would want it to be. Definitely not. Because in one sense, the majority of the conditions of our life, like our actual physical body, our genetics, our capacities, our limitations, our family situation, our social class, all these things are pushed upon us. It's like it was already there, even before you opened your eyes for the first time. These things are already set in place. And then you start to live your life within these parameters, and then you try your best. You see, okay, maybe I can do a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and we try to adjust things here and there. But you can never adjust it perfectly according to your own desire. And if you try to, you will go crazy. You will either become extremely angry and aggressive, or you will go insane. Because you can't really fully control your own life, how it goes. You can just try to make certain decisions and steer it in one way or another. And therefore we see Krishna's instruction in the Bhagavad Gita is so interesting that he says that one of the foundational principles of spiritual consciousness is one should learn to not be disturbed. One should learn to not be disturbed by the conditions of one's life, because it is not within your control. So if you're going to be disturbed by these things, then you're setting yourself up for a lifetime of frustration. And that frustration is problematic, because that frustration will cause disturbance in the consciousness. And then it is impossible to focus your mind on anything, impossible to concentrate on anything. It becomes impossible to perform any kind of meditation. It becomes impossible to hear about the pastimes of Krishna. Because when we want to sit down, when we want to start hearing, then the mind is cooking. So many things. Oh God, what about this? Oh, I would really like it to have like this. What about this? Couldn't it be like this? Maybe I should do it like this. So in this way, therefore, if we become disturbed by external conditions, our spiritual life becomes very unsteady. And therefore we also see people in our movement. They would sometimes come and then they would go, and they come and they go. And it is due to the disturbance that is created by the mind. Prabhupada tells the story of Bhanu Swami. So at a certain point he was in Calcutta. In the Calcutta temple, it was a crazy temple at that time. It was just crazy. Rats, cockroaches, a lot of fighting between the devotees, a lot of politics. Very interesting. Maybe you've experienced something like that before. Sounds familiar. So then, but Bhanu Swami, everybody was getting sick. They were all getting sick. Because whatever, too much paneer for breakfast, God knows what, but they were all getting sick the whole time. And then what happened is, but there was one devotee there, Bhanu Swami. At that time he wasn't Swami, he was Bhanu Brahmacharya. Was his name Bhanu? I'm not sure actually, I'm not sure. In any case, when he was still a Brahmacharya. Yeah. And then he was the only one who was not getting sick. Everybody was getting mental, everybody was getting sick, everybody was getting disturbed, going up and down. But he was just doing what he needed to do. He was performing his duty. And when Prabhupada went there, Prabhupada saw the situation and the devotees complaining what was happening, and someone was mentioning, but somehow this devotee, he is the only one that is not getting sick. And then Prabhupada says, yes, that is brahmachari. That is what it means to be a brahmachari. Is that because he is simply focused on his transcendental duties, therefore he is not shaken or affected by the external conditions. So therefore we see that is Krishna's instruction to us, is that because we are not fully in control of our own life, and because most of our life is actually inflicted upon us, and not really we doing what we want, therefore we have to have the right orientation towards your life. And a lot of modern day self-help psychology and all kinds of pop wisdom, people will try to tell you how you have to take control of your life, and you have to, if you dream it, you can do it, and you have to manifest your ideal life or all these things. You have to be careful of these things, because these things are actually untrue fundamentally. It's not at all Krishna's instructions. Does it mean that we are powerless? Not at all. At the same time, we have great power. We have great power. We have a certain amount of power, and that power is the ability to accept some kind of responsibility and then hold on to that duty, because that is Krishna's instruction. He's not saying that you are powerless. He's saying that you have the ability. If you can stick to your duties that are given to you, then you will be able to rise up and make the best of what your life is. But that life will not necessarily coincide exactly how you would like it. Okay. But then Krishna, he is Atma Tantra. His life is very different. Everything is exactly as he wants it. Because he is powerful. He can manifest whatever he wishes. Therefore, the incarnations of Krishna, when they enter into this world and they perform activities, therefore these activities are unique. And therefore these activities are considered spiritual. And they are not products of the material energy, because they are not motivated or controlled by the three modes of material nature. They are motivated and controlled by Krishna's personal desire. And therefore, by hearing about these activities, we get a glimpse and we start to understand what is happening in the spiritual reality. Because the main factor that determines the quality of your life and also the result of your life is not really the actions that you perform, but it is the motivation behind it. That is what determines everything. And when we speak about the purification of the heart, or the purification that happens when we engage in devotional service seriously, that is the purification. It is the purification of our motivations that has to take place. And when we speak about someone who is advanced in devotional service, that is really what it means. It doesn't necessarily mean he will be a great singer or very learned or any of these things, but it means that the motivation that lies behind everything that he does, that motivation is pure. And it is not very difficult. One does not need to be something extraordinary. One just has to be sincere and have that sincere desire to have a pure motivation. And what is that pure motivation? Motivation is that simply, let me act for the pleasure of my spiritual master and Krishna. And that is the motivating factor behind what we do. And in that way, one becomes freed from the three modes of nature. And when we speak about being infected by the three modes of nature, that is then what we experience. Is that infection means one is somehow, one's motivation, one is being pushed by one of these three modes. So either pushed by insanity or darkness or depression or violence or anger. That is what is motivating one. Or one is strongly motivated by the desire for profit and material enjoyment. Or one is strongly motivated by the desire to have peace and be free of suffering. But all these three things are still being pushed by the material energy. But Krishna, we see, he is not, he is Atma Tantra, means he is independent of these three modes. His motivation is what? His motivation is simply how to maximize the pleasure of my devotees. And therefore even this whole material world, in a certain sense, is still connected to Krishna's desire. Because this world is responding to whatever is our attitude. So therefore even the apparent harshness of this world, or the difficulties of this world, or the discomfort that happens in this world, that is also there. It is an expression still of Krishna trying to do what is best for the devotees. And therefore the devotee, he also embraces it like that. And in that way, this attitude of the devotee can transform any experience in this world into something meaningful. Suffering cannot be avoided. And that is the one thing that one has to understand. In this world, at the moment, many of the very worst sinful activities, some of the most destructive, harmful actions are happening in this world, motivated by the hope to try to end suffering, ironically enough. If you think, for example, about what they are doing to animals, and animal testing, if you should read about it, you will be astounded what they do to animals to test certain things, like for example pain medication. So pain medication, we see now a big thing, everybody takes pain meds, but if you see where does it start, how do they test that pain meds? They tested it on animals, crushing them, slicing them, pulling them, all various forms of trying to inflicting pain on them, they're trying to see how they respond and if the medicine is working. And how did they justify doing that? But it is for the greater good, because this pain medicine will help us to reduce suffering. So if a few animals have to suffer for us to eliminate pain, that is worth it. If you think about the modern wars that have been fought, Second World War, even both sides, genocides, how is genocide motivated? They're saying, yes, but we will create a perfect world where there is no suffering. So therefore it is, if a few million people have to die, it's a small price to pay, isn't it, to make a perfect world. So therefore one sees utopianism, or thinking that we can make this world perfect, it actually leads to great violence. Whereas the devotion or Krishna's advice is, just tolerate. Don't try to make this world perfect, then you make it worse. Then you get more and more entangled in it. Whereas if one steps back, and you become peaceful, and you tolerate as much as you can, and you focus on performing your transcendental duties, then actually life becomes quite peaceful. And one doesn't get entangled more and more into trying to do it. Like now we see such a complex arrangement being made in this city. To do what? To eat, to sleep, and to have children, and to have some insurance. And for this sake we have invented so many amazing things. Refrigerators, electricity, you see how many people, the subway, so many, Amazon, so many crazy things we've created. But at the end, what do? The same thing that you can do in a village in India. You eat and you sleep, but it can be peaceful. So therefore, very interesting, Krishna's instructions. Now, here we also see Maharaj Parikshit is asking, he wants to hear also about the end of Krishna's pastimes, at the principle of annihilation. So Krishna teaches also by example. Krishna expected Arjuna to do something inconceivable. He expected him to fight the war, even though he was fighting against his family. That should be expected of him. You read similar happenings in the American Civil War, where sometimes families would also have to fight with one another. And it was very difficult, you can imagine, fighting towards your own cousins, your own brothers, and your own family. But Krishna told Arjuna, you have to be detached and you have to perform your duty, even though now it is very difficult, but you have to do it. But then Krishna himself, he is not a hypocrite. He teaches by example. What did he do? At the end, when it is time to relinquish, to let the world end up, he annihilated his whole family, the Yadus, they annihilated one another. And Krishna was manifesting his highest principle of renunciation, showing that he himself is also detached. He himself is also detached. So very interesting how Krishna teaches by that example, to show how duty is something in this world that one has to always keep as one's highest priority. Because the moment that one abandons duty, then one starts the spiral down and becomes more and more entangled into this world. And sometimes even if there's apparently something very difficult to be done, if it is really Krishna's desire, then that is the best course of action. So in this way, Krishna stays the witness of everything, and even when there is creation, maintenance or annihilation, it goes on in one sense by a higher principle than merely personal desire. So in this way, Maharaj Parikshit wants to hear about all these various things. And it is an interesting principle. I see nowadays, we see more and more devotees becoming coaches. It's an interesting thing, the whole life coach phenomena that is also manifesting within our society. And it is something that one has to understand that is very, very dangerous. If one takes the principle of starting to teach something, then one has to be sure you have some qualification to do that. And we see that oftentimes, I've seen recently people, see someone becomes a relationship coach, but it's like, what is your qualification to do something like that? Like I did some premarital counseling recently, and it was great because I was being counseled by devotees who've been married for 40 years. Now that's like some Shakti, that's 40 years of doing something. So they're resting on some qualification, they're resting on some personal realization. So in this way, that is the ideal teachers. So very interesting how, but in the modern world, people think it is as simple as doing a weekend course or reading one book, and then you become an expert on relationships, or you become an expert on personal development, or you become an expert on achieving your desires. So very fascinating how in one world becomes very cheap, and one has to be careful of that. So Krishna constantly manifested that principle of teaching by personal example, and one has to sometimes be patient, make sure that he first develops some substance before one can preach. And even in our movement, we see that the basic principle of preaching Krishna consciousness, the basic lesson that one wants to impart onto other living beings, is that you have to be loyal to your spiritual master. That is the root cause, that is the beginning of bhakti, is loyalty. And one cannot really speak of any kind of love if there is not loyalty. So therefore that basic principle is there in this world. If there is no commitment, if there is no loyalty, then you know nothing about what it means, what love means. And you will never be able to experience what is real devotion. And therefore that is the difference between the authentic Vaishnava and the Sahajya. The Sahajya thinks that it is possible to experience devotion without real commitment or sacrifice. But that tendency is very deeply rooted within us all, and we have to be protected against it. So therefore we say in Krishna consciousness, we're trying to convince people that if you would direct your ultimate loyalties to Krishna and to his service, that is the perfection of your life, and in that you will have access to the most wonderful experience. But in order to preach that effectively and to teach that effectively, one has to do it himself. And that loyalty grows and manifests by our consistent investment in Krishna's service. And in the beginning it starts with something as simple as washing pots or doing whatever is required to keep Krishna's mission going. But that is the ultimate goal, is that it teaches us, as we invest more and more, then actually our loyalty grows, and then the eternal experience becomes more and more substantial. So that is really what Prabhupada envisioned. So just a little warning for those who are interested in becoming and somehow participating in the education and teaching of others, that one has to understand that it is a very serious business to enter into that position of trying to become a counselor or a coach or a teacher or whatever you want to call it. But that principle of positioning oneself as an authority is something that has to be very carefully done. And at each moment one has to pray to Krishna for one's protection. And that is the principle. Prabhupada explains that every sane man must be very afraid to fall from his position. And therefore, if one prays to Krishna, then it is possible that he can protect us. But one has to understand that one is constantly under attacked by alternative loyalties, false loyalties and distractions on the path. And therefore, we see in the 3rd canto of the Bhagavatam, when Lord Brahma was just about to create the material energy, he was feeling overwhelmed by how difficult it will be to organize this world. Very difficult. And we similarly, if we look at our life, we can feel overwhelmed by how difficult it is going to be to organize all these things. Not just to organize the externals of your life, but even to organize your own internal reality. So many desires that are out of place, so many urges that are there, so many proclivities that are not really supposed to be part of a civilized person's internal world. But Lord Brahma was feeling overwhelmed, but then Krishna told him, do not feel overwhelmed. Do not become depressed, and do not become anxious in the execution of your duty. By penance and meditation, it will be possible for you to hear what I am instructing to you. And in that way, I will protect you. And in that purport, Prabhupada says, when an individual is properly situated and performing his duty for Krishna, he says, the amount of mercy that the Lord bestows upon such an individual is unimaginable. He says, beyond imagination. Amazing to think of that way. And it is a fact. If the Supreme Personality of Godhead is in one sense protecting one, it is beyond imagination the amount of support and the empowerment that can happen there. But one has to simply properly be directed. And in that way one can be protected. And no position in this world that one takes in can be positively maintained without Krishna's protection. And that actually is the secret of taking on any kind of responsibility in this world. Okay, let us hear if there are any questions or any comments on anything that has been said today. Gopal Champu Babu and then Bhakta Alex. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Does that answer your question?
And at least I'm seeing more and more of it recently. As you know, this kind of new age that was being promoted. Actually, I met this lady from Riverhead, who also lives in she works in Port Jefferson, and she was saying that now she works at a metaphysical store. And she's saying this stones and stuff is like blowing up. She said her business is blowing up out in Long Island.
Wow.
So what would you say to such people? Like, how should we guide them to say, okay, yes, you have some power to manifest some things in the future, but not the way you think it is?
Exactly, yeah, that's what we would say. You do indeed manifest your future. You manifest your future, but not in a vacuum. So you have a certain, just like we can see, every person has a certain kind of strength. Like there's a certain weight limit to how many things you can pick up. So if you try to pick this up, you can do it. But if you try to pick up that Vyasa-san, then what is the point? So similarly, yes, you have an ability to manifest, but like anything else, you have certain limitations. And like we see, it is possible, if you train and you focus, then you will be able to lift up more than if you don't train and you're unfocused. But there's still certain kind of human limitations. And therefore, just as important, like Goethe, a European author, he said to become wise means to know your limitations. Because if you understand your limitations, then you can also become much more focused, and then you know what is actually possible. And we would say that if you're really interested in manifesting something wonderful, then one has to also be interested in receiving Krishna's empowerment. Because when we add our own ability to Krishna's empowerment, then one can actually achieve something truly wonderful. So one can encourage that understanding. It is good if you understand. This whole New Age philosophy is very interesting because some of it is very true and it is very revolutionary, it is very wonderful that people understand these things, that they start to understand that how the internal world has a big influence on the external world. But then it has to be added with some, as Prabhupada called it, some more, the scientific element. There are some principles that govern these things. And we can give them some interesting examples on that. Astrology, Vedic astrology, we see is also a part of the Vedic principle, because that is in one sense, the astrology is the science of understanding your limitations to a large part. That's what astrology actually teaches you. It shows you what is the potential that is there and what are the limits also of what one can achieve. So usually if you would combine that, if you get a little bit into that, if you have a proper astrologer obviously, then you can get a better idea of where to put your focus. So helping understand our limitations help us to properly direct our focus. And ironically enough, then we will achieve more than if we are living under some misconception of what our actual abilities and potential is. Because then we will try to achieve the impossible. And Prithu Maharaj, when he was being instructed by the four Kumaras told him, he said, no, Lord Vishnu actually, after he was trying to perform his 100 horse sacrifices. And then Indra came to consistently interrupt his sacrifice. And then Lord Vishnu appeared and says, abandon this desire for 100 sacrifices. He says, do not be disturbed. He says, because if your mind enters into that, which is impossible, then he says, then you enter into the darkest regions of ignorance. It's very interesting. Because then what happens is, then you start to live in a fantasy when you're trying to achieve the impossible. And then you actually start to degrade yourself greatly. And if we look at many people in the world, they're exactly like that. They live in fantasy, consistently indulging in fantasies that will never become reality. And that is a very dark place to be in. Dr. Alex. Thank you, Alex.
I just want to end on the manifestation. You know, I'm homeless, and manifesting has been basically a lot of things I do a lot.
Yeah.
And as I've been manifesting, I noticed 3 laws that are in common.
Yeah.
There's the physical, spiritual, and the surprise. Spiritual is, we pray and then, for a job opportunity, and Lord Krishna will provide. And then physical is like, I want to get a job and I want to get a car, so I want to manifest a fast car, so I go and I get a job, and then I get a car.
Yeah.
And then the other one is surprise, like, Krishna will surprise you really.
Like with a toothache or diarrhea or something like that.
Well, nothing bad, but like, the unexpected, like, you didn't ask for it, didn't pay for it, but it was just perfect.
$500 bill.
Yeah, exactly, $500 bill, or you meet a friend, or like for me, this was surprising that I'm actually sitting here, talking, holding a mic in my hand. I wasn't actually expecting to be here, but this was a surprise, Krishna led me here through some type of manifestation. But I was thinking, spiritual prayers, always constantly praying for good fortune, and this is good fortune, It's basically, leading you to basically the fountain of youth and, pureness. So I'm thankful for that. And so that's the laws of manifestation, at least from my perspective.
Yeah.
It's spiritual, physical, and surprise. and then another comment I just want to make, is that I really love the fact that you say, as devotees, we have to be motivated, to serve Krishna. That's a point that really helps me, especially in my situation. I have to be motivated, otherwise, life would be boring. And so, just to add on that definition of motivation, which I actually surprisingly has read in the Bhagavad Gita, that motivation, not only motivation, but also the secret is, to have the true bliss of devotion, is enthusiasm. Enthusiasm. And I looked up the meaning of enthusiasm, and this is what it says. So for any listener online, that you just really want to engage in devotional service, the secret is enthusiasm, which is intense and eager enjoyment, interest, or approval. So, when we're engaging in Krishna consciousness, not only just we have enthusiasm, but uncontaminated enthusiasm, right? We leave the emotional aspect behind it. And that comes back to like the Bhakti Yoga principle, you know. We don't do anything for ourselves, we don't do fruitful, you know, manifestation of devotional service, but we do it for Krishna and for his pleasure, and then the return is absolutely beautiful.
Jai. Thank you, Dr. Alex. Was always enthusiastic
Yes.
for the
And
devotional
that's the
service.
secret.
That is the secret.
Because it causes other people to have the same energy.
Yes.
And then we together we harmonize.
And enthusiasm is contagious, as they say, just like the coronavirus. Okay, not the Bargaranga.
Sometimes you have to think until you do it.
That's it.
I was just, it's interesting in the program, you know, Krishna gives us everything to the external potency when he's finished. And he's talking about even he's unaffected when he has like arranged for the so-called demise of his entire dynasty. Just because he knew that, like, you know, now people are getting puffed up for so many things that they shouldn't really be getting puffed up for. So to speak, if you think, yeah, I'm the God who's like my great grandfather or something.
Yeah.
Literally. And so because he could foresee it being like too much of a burden for the earth, and there was the whole purpose of it to come and rid, you know, Mother Earth of all the different demonic burdens.
Yeah.
Including the Mahabharata fight and the battle of Kurukshetra. That he had arranged even, you know, something like that. And yeah,
Yeah.
that was very interesting.
And interesting, even I was thinking as a more contemporary example, we see when Prabhupada went to Mal Krishna Maharaj when they were doing the Radha Damodar bus party. And at a certain point they had like 150 brahmacharis, 6 buses. They were distributing, they were making like, I think it was like $100,000 a month was coming in. It was just astounding. And it was just growing and growing. And at a certain point what they would do is they would come past the temple. And then the temple devotees are here, we have to wash the pots and like, you know, fight the cockroaches and you know, this, that. And then they're just like, what are you doing here in the temple? What are you doing? Wasting your life. Just get on this bus and you can just go. So they would like go to a temple and then when they leave, all the devotees just go with them. It's just the temple president who's left and then it's like, what just happened, you know? And then they were preaching also strongly. They were starting to say, oh, actually everybody is in Maya. Everybody is in Maya, except us. A very interesting philosophy that you see again and again. And then it's causing so much problems, even though it was such a powerful program. And everything was there. Thousands of books going out. So much Lakshmi coming in. But it causing so much tension. And then what did Prabhupada do? He snipped it. He said, done. Now you go to China. It's very interesting. You see how Prabhupada was unattached. He wasn't thinking, oh, he's bringing in so much money. Oh, it's like he's distributing so many books. So let him just do whatever he wants to do. Prabhupada is like, no, for the greater benefit, for the greater good for everyone. This program is scrapped now. It's very fascinating. So you see Prabhupada also manifesting that principle of renunciation. And that is very difficult actually to do. Any other comments, questions? Rajmohan, anything today? No. Nothing today. Fully satisfied. Okay, 8:45, what a wonderful time to end the Bhagavatam class. Grantaraj Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam ki, Śrīla Prabhupada ki, Jai, Go Premanand.